Okay, let's get this one out of the way immediately before I even introduce the tier list. Charizard is unironically the worst Pokemon for a Fire Red Leaf Green Nuzlocke. The reason it sits all the way at the bottom of F tier is not only does this Pokemon not contribute anything valuable at any point of the game, you are actively sabotaging your run by picking it. You see, the most important part of your Kanto Nuzlocke journey is going to be the Elite Four. This is by far the most challenging part of the game. I would maybe even say the only truly challenging part. And this entire tier list will warp around this fact. The champion fight in this game is no joke, especially considering how specialized your team is going to have to be for the rest of the final gauntlet. By picking Charmander, you are not only getting an encounter that has no standout performance on a single boss fight in the game, not only did you pick up a Pokemon that you won't even bring to the Elite Four, you are actively giving the champion, your rival, the strongest possible team. Out of the 3 non-starter Fire, Water, Grass Pokemon that Gary can have, Exeggutor and Arcanine are the 2 most threatening ones, while Blastoise is also the most powerful of the 3 starter Pokemon. If he doesn't have a Blastoise, his water type is Gyarados, which you're already considering when team building because Lance already has a Gyarados anyway. And to make things even worse, picking Charmander is the only way you could end up losing to the very first gym leader, Brock. If you don't hit Mankey, you can genuinely wipe here with Charmander. Alright, with that out of the way, welcome to my new and improved Gen 1 Nuzlocke tier list video. I know I've made Nuzlocke tier lists before, but I'm not gonna lie, those were very vibes based, and they were very long ago. At the time, I might have had over 3,000 hours of Nuzlocke experience, but almost all that time has been spent playing way more difficult ROM hacks. Also, the production value of these videos, well, Dusclops is actually arguably worse than, or Dusknoir is arguably worse than Dusclops. It has a little bit better offensive capabilities, but that's about it. I think I'll put it here. Because like if I'm using healing items, then holy shit, Eviolite Dusclops is so much better. So, I figured it's time to make some more reliable lists for you, starting in Kanto with Fire Red and Leaf Green, because who the hell plays actual Gen 1? I actually did some meticulous testing for this new tier list, and I feel like I have a much more accurate idea of the strength of every Pokemon, as well as the challenges that the game provides this time around. Because just about any box can get you to the Elite Four, this tier list is going to heavily value Pokemon that can contribute once you're there. That said, there are a few Pokemon that shine in the early game, and they'll get highlighted as well. Let's continue through F tier, the tier that has every Pokemon that I feel like actively hurts your run if you pick it up. Take Porygon. Not only is it completely outclassed by pretty much every other normal type, you can only get it at the game corner for an absurd amount of coins. Most importantly though, taking Porygon means giving up every other casino encounter or the free Eevee, which also has a catch location of Celadon City. Even if Porygon did offer some mid-game value, which it doesn't, it wouldn't be worth giving up Vaporeon or Jolteon or the one casino encounter that's, by extension, actually going to end up in S tier. Same idea goes for Lickitung. It's only available via trade, and depending on which game you're playing, you'll have to give up either Golduck or Slowbro. Golduck isn't great, but look at Lickitung! This thing is like offensively bad. Both Slowbro and Golduck are better just on the basis of being water types, and Lickitung isn't bringing anything to the table. Okay, Ditto technically doesn't hurt your run when picked up, like sometimes it is just your random encounter, but come on, you gotta put Ditto in F tier, right? Moving up to C tier, we have the Pokemon who don't actively sabotage your run, but are always outclassed by something else on the list. Marowak is a fine example. Ground types are usually in pretty high demand for a Nuzlocke, but Marowak doesn't show up until after Surge, and by the time you get it, you could already have Sandslash, which is basically the exact same Mon. I guess you could technically get a Thick Club to improve its attack, but I honestly don't even see how Marowak with doubled attack does anything valuable by the time you actually get it. Persian is C tier, outclassed by the other normal types in a world where it doesn't benefit from Gen 1's insane crit mechanics. Hitmonchan was both useless and outclassed by the other option from the Fighting Dojo, Hitmonlee. Magmar comes way too late, and fire types are also just kinda bad in this game. Like, they don't really do anything. Seeking, Golduck, and Seadra don't stack up against the rest of the game's water types, which are all available at the exact same time that these guys are. I guess they all sweep Blaine and Giovanni, but like, who doesn't? This is the essence of C tier. I should also mention here, I'm assuming the player does not have access to trait evolutions. I didn't really do any testing on Golem, Alakazam, Gengar, and Machamp. If I had to guess, Zam and Gengar would be A tier, Golem and Machamp would probably be B tier, but I feel like most people don't go through the effort of hacking them in or trading them with themselves. This is why Machoke just doesn't cut it and sits down here in C tier. Muck might have a case for a higher rating if it got Shadow Ball to give it a purpose in the Agatha fight, but as it is, it's just useless and obtained way too late. Pretty disappointing, honestly. Kabutops is both just useless on the Elite Four, but also prevents you from getting Omastar, a substantially better water rock type for the Elite Four. Similarly, Aerodactyl is also surprisingly useless in the Elite Four, joining Kabutops in C tier. Okay, maybe I'm being a little bit inconsistent here with placing Lickitung in F tier and these guys in C tier, when they both just kind of replace a Pokemon that's better, but like at least Kabutops and Aerodactyl aren't like offensively bad, and also the Pokemon they replace aren't like essential. Cloyster also belongs in C tier, thanks to an unforgivable sin for any water type. It can't even solo Blaine. Yeah, he's not him. Moltres is also in C tier. It's a legendary in a game with just 3 usable legendaries, but Fire Flying is just not a good typing for the Elite Four, and you literally don't get it until you're right on the doorstep. Use your Master Ball for something else, I say. With that, we can move on to the vast majority of Pokemon that actually do something, B tier. Pokemon that all have some sort of use in the early or mid game, but drop off substantially by the time we get to the Elite Four and the actual challenge of the game. We'll start with Onix. It's trash for the vast majority of the game, but escapes a C tier fate thanks to the fact that it can be a last-ditch counter to Giovanni's Kangaskhan in Rocket Hideout. This Kangaskhan is like actually a little bit threatening. Ductrio similarly only has one real use. It can solo Surge as a Diglett. You usually don't need it unless you've gotten ridiculously unlucky with your encounters at that point, but it can be a run saver in those instances. Weezing was really disappointing. I tried to make this thing work in the Elite Four, think there was something there with its physical bulk and poison resistance for Agatha, but it just can't cut it. Bulky enough to be useful for some tougher mid-game fights like Koga, but that's about it. Victory Bell is complete trash for 95% of the game, but sneaks into B tier because Weeping Bell can save your run at Misty if you're in extreme need for a grass type. Fearow is a worse version of the early game flying normal type Pidgeot. Well, not really, it does have better offensive stats, but Pidgeot has some unique tech that makes it actually usable in the Elite Four. Okay, we're gonna get a lot of hate for this one, but listen, I initially thought Farfetch'd was going to be down in F tier. It is a trade-only mon for Spearow, but like, you don't actually regret trading away your Spearow? My thesis is that Farfetch'd and Fearow do the exact same things in Fire Red and Leaf Green. Farfetch'd is even arguably a better Erica counter than Fearow, which places it into B tier. Golbat similarly earns B tier status thanks to destroying Erica. It also can be helpful against the rival's grass starter if you take Squirtle. Okay, let's go back to this one more time. Seriously, I'm not kidding. I actually think that Farfetch'd and Fearow fulfill the exact same roles and are equally useful, despite Fearow technically having better stats. Pinsir, Rapidash, and Flareon are all B tier for the same reason. They've got solid attacking stats for mid-game trainers and bosses, but they just don't have enough to hack it in the Elite Four. Speaking of these three, there's something I discovered about this game while testing. If you'd like to know something cool I learned about Nuzlocking this game that doesn't really have much to do with the tier list itself, I'll tell you about it in today's sponsor segment presented by Manscaped. You see, during my testing of Fire Red Leaf Green, I found out that when you reach Celadon City, you actually gain access to the secret power TM. Just how today's sponsor Manscaped can help you access the secret power of a clean shave experience with the Chairman Pro package. The main event is of course the Chairman Pro, Manscaped's premium electric foil shaver. It's got those 4 blades for a super close shave. It's waterproof and charges via USB-C like we're used to from Manscaped, and its Flex Adjust technology lets it perfectly adjust to your face to upgrade your shaving game. Kinda like how the infinite supply of secret power TMs in Celadon lets you substantially upgrade a lot of kinda meh mid-game physical attackers. 70 base power is quite high when you consider how bad a lot of the Gen 3 learn sets are, and the best part is every Pokemon in the game learns it. The best part of the Chairman Pro package, on the other hand, is that it not only comes with the premium Chairman shaver, it also comes with the Manscaped Power Shave Gel for that satisfying, safe, wet shave experience. It also includes the Face Soother, which is an aftershave serum to cap things off at the end. Head on over to manscaped.com/pChal for 20% off this perfect gift for loved ones or for yourself, and head on over to the department store in Celadon to gift otherwise terrible Pokemon their highest power physical move. Pokemon like Pidgeotto, Flareon, Pinsir, and Gyarados really appreciate this one. Gyarados might be the biggest surprise here in B tier. I only ever see this guy in A and S tier, and for later games that kinda makes sense. But with no physical special split in Gen 3, Gyarados' water moves are coming off of its brutal 60 base special attack, and it just doesn't have the power to take down the Pokemon you need it to. There is no fight to Dragonance set up on, it just doesn't do it. It's not just the Elite Four where Gyarados falters, it can't even solo Blaine. It does give some important early game support by soloing Misty, it does great in every Giovanni fight, but the total package is pretty underwhelming given how good Gyarados is in most other contexts. Parasect's garbage typing and stat line mean it can only be useful for so long, but this thing is actually kind of godlike in early game. It does great against Misty, can sometimes even solo her, and it can solo Surge if you use your Dig TM on it. Primeape is mostly useless outside of one scenario. If you pick Charmander, you need Mankey to beat Brock. That means you've already decided you want to play on hard mode anyway, but it's enough for a niche to earn B tier. Graveler is unfortunately a waste of the excellent potential of rock ground typing. Despite resisting poison and hitting it for super effective damage, it can't solo Koga, nor does it provide as much as you'd expect against Agatha given that profile. Those are the two fights that had the potential to pull this thing up to A tier, and it just doesn't do enough. But resisting normal is good enough for B tier. Kingler's huge attack stat makes it a great Pokemon for a lot of the early and mid-game random trainers, but unfortunately it falls off pretty hard by the end game. Not only does it not provide the value you want from a water type thanks to the same issues Gyarados has with the physical special split, it also can't solo Blaine. Sandslash's biggest asset is showing up early. It solos Surge and has good enough stats to take down a bunch of the early game random trainers before quickly becoming obsolete. Butterfree is an easy Pokemon to plug into any team for the early and mid-game thanks to its ability to support with the powder moves. If you ever find yourself lacking on a random early or mid-game fight, Sleep Powder can bail you out. Unfortunately, its complete lack of offense makes it unusable for the Elite Four. Wigglytuff isn't terribly impressive when you put it next to most normal types in this game, but if you get it in Mount Moon and evolve it early, it has great stats compared to most of the Pokemon you'll be running up against for a while. That's enough to make it kind of legitimate for the early game, particularly against Misty and Surge. Ninetale's biggest asset is easily its early access to Flamethrower. Vulpix learns the move at level 29, meaning you can bring Flamethrower Ninetales to the Erica fight, one of the hardest counters for any gym battle in the game. After that though, it's just kind of a nice fast stat check for random trainers. Again, fire types don't really do anything in this game. Arbok is another mon with great stats for the early game, evolving before Lieutenant Surge and offering some of the earliest access to the move Bite before falling off hard in the late game. I wanted so much more for Vileplume. Gloom solos Misty, this thing destroys Giovanni, but it comes up short in both of the Elite Four fights where it seems like it could be helpful. I really wanted a Sunny Day Solar Beam to work for this guy, but Solar Beam misses the KO against Lorelei's Lapras, and it just doesn't do enough on Bruno to make up for its uselessness throughout the rest of the Elite Four. Raticate is actually down here. It's an awesome early game Pokemon that gets outscaled hard as the game progresses. The fact that only half of these guys get Guts is a problem, but honestly, Raticate is a trap on the Elite Four, even if you win the ability coin flip. It just doesn't hit the damage ranges you need it to. The biggest problem here, compared to other games with Guts users, is that you don't get access to Facade in this game. Guts is a good ability, but it's just not that good on its own. Tauros was a really compelling Pokemon on paper, but unfortunately it's missing the one thing it needs to be useful in the Elite Four, access to Shadow Ball to hit Agatha. It does solo Koga and Sabrina, so there is still some use for it, despite the fact that you only get it in the Safari Zone. Up here in B tier, get it? Get it? Beedrill is an absolute early game god thanks to its early evolution. It's one of the best users of the Secret Power TM and is strong all the way through Koga. It just doesn't have the stats or typing to justify itself on an E4 team. Similarly, both Nidos are great early game Pokemon by the same logic as Wigglytuff. They're early Moonstone evolutions that can roll through trainers after Misty, all the way through to Koga thanks to their stats, relative to the basic and stage 1 Pokemon you're usually locked into at this stage of the game. They have one of the most diverse move pools, which allows them to help with pretty much any random trainer or boss fight or whatever. They just fall a bit short of Elite Four viability, leaving them at the top of B tier. Okay, here we go. I wasn't kidding when I said that the difficulty of the Elite Four warps this entire tier list. The main threats in this Elite Four are Lorelei's Dugong and Lapras, Bruno's Hitmonlee and Machamp, Agatha's Gengars, but honestly her whole team is kind of a threat, Lance's entire team, and the Champion's entire team. Every Pokemon from here on out helps you beat at least one of these threats. Even if these Pokemon are substantially worse in the early game than some of the mons I've listed, I find any niche on the Elite Four to be more valuable. There are more than enough Pokemon that help out in the early game fights, and the Elite Four is really that large of a difficulty spike compared to the rest of the game. Let's talk about the A tier. Pidgeot! How the hell did you end up in here? Over Fearow? There is genuinely something that Pidgeot can do on the Elite Four, and that's Feather Dance. I actually think it's substantially worse in the mid-game than a lot of the B tiers, but the ability to ruin physical attackers with a single click of Feather Dance is a huge asset in the Elite Four, giving opportunities to switch and even set up for a sweep in some cases. Hitmonlee is clearly the best option of the Fighting Dojo rewards, mostly for one specific Pokemon. It helps beat the demon that is Lorelei's Lapras. And that's the only thing it does, but Lapras is so much of a demon that is enough for Hitmonlee to be A tier. In the early and mid game, Arcanine is severely held back by the fact that you need to delay its evolution until level 49 to learn Flamethrower. But once it's online, it's a predictably solid Pokemon. It doesn't really sweep any Elite Four team or anything, but it does solid work at filling gaps against Bruno, Agatha, most importantly the champion and his killer Exeggutor. You can also get extreme speed on this guy for the champion's Alakazam. Even without access to Gengar, Haunter is pretty solid, sweeping Koga if you give it Psychic, and giving you a normal type immunity for the whole game. But it actually also has an extremely niche application in the Elite Four. That was one of my favorite bits of tech that I found in the whole testing phase. It can actually set up Curse on Machamp without dying, and then allows you to just switch back and forth to stall it out. Machamp is a threat, and if you need a counter to it, consider Haunter. Chansey is exactly what you think. A ridiculously bulky special wall that helps you stall out some opponents. Articuno is really underwhelming for a legendary Pokemon. It just gets absolutely dunked on by Bruno's Rock Tombs, but it is probably the best counter to Dragonite, as long as you can keep it alive until Lance. If you're building for the Elite Four and missing only and really only a Dragonite counter, this guy might be worth picking up. Dragonite itself is also really underwhelming given its huge stat total. Its best Elite Four use is against Bruno, where it can 1v1 Machamp, and if you get a little bit lucky, it can take out the Hitmonlee after as well. For most of the game, Venomoth is pretty much indistinguishable from Butterfree, but on Bruno, Venomoth's Shield Dust ability comes up big. It lets it tank Rock Tomb from any of Bruno's 3 Rock Tomb Pokemon and avoid the speed drop, maintaining the speed advantage and 1v1ing even Machamp by using Psychic. It's actually even decent on Agatha. Like, seriously, this thing is not that bad. Dodrio solos Sabrina, but it's really here because it has applications on 3 fights in the Elite Four. It's a shaky answer into Bruno's fighting types due to its secondary normal typing. It's a better answer to Agatha, outspeeding one of her Gengars and sometimes getting early bird to deal with sleep spam. It's also a solid answer to Lance's Dragonairs. It's not like it wins any one fight for you, but you won't feel bad about bringing it to the Elite Four given that versatility. It just has that stat total that Fearow is kind of lacking. Scyther is an absolutely incredible Pokemon for mid-game onwards. I can't believe I'm saying this. Its access to agility and sword dance mean you can actually set up full team sweeps with this guy. It can sweep Sabrina, solo Erica, and even Koga if you give it a berry. On the Elite Four, it can actually set up on Lorelei if you're ballsy enough to go for it. It can take out Hitmonlee and Machamp on Bruno. It can frag 3 on Agatha. It's definitely too frail for the final 2 fights, but it does more than enough up to that point to be a solid brain. Clefable has access to Soft Boiled and Cosmic Power as well as Toxic, making it in theory capable of 1v1ing anything if you really need to fill a gap on your Elite Four and have nothing else to do it with. Kadabra is an absolute mid-game monster, shredding pretty much every random trainer. Its access to Psychic without using a TM is a huge asset, and with it, you can solo Erica and Koga, as well as doing well on Lieutenant Surge. Its E4 usage is way more niche because it really can't take hits, but it provides important psychic damage into Bruno's fighters and Agatha's poison types. Depending on what stats you roll, a good Kadabra can full sweep Bruno and Agatha. It's just really hard to actually switch in on other fights, and its value goes down quite a lot because of that. Similarly, Hypno is a great mid-game mon and solos Koga. This thing has a great matchup into Machamp. Unfortunately, it's not as good as you would like it to be against Agatha, but it does have the bulk to be useful on some of the other fights as well. Okay, here's what might actually be the most controversial placement on the entire list. Snorlax down in A tier. After soloing Sabrina, it really comes online once you get to the Elite Four. It's one of the rare mons that can actually 1v1 Lorelei's Lapras. It can potentially sweep Agatha with Rest Talk, but will likely need support at some point. It's a tank that can deal with Lance's Dragonairs, and it's amazing into the champ being one of the only consistent counters to Alakazam. But I've seen so many Nuzlocke tier lists that place this as like a top 3 Pokemon in the region, and I'm just not sure why? It's a fantastic gap filler for the Elite Four, don't get me wrong, but I genuinely don't feel like it trivializes any of these fights. I think a box that needs Snorlax to beat the Elite Four is actually kinda rare. I will much more often need one of the upcoming Pokemon. Almost all the rest of this tier can be put into one of 2 categories. Category 1 is water types with powerful ice beams. Wait, we forgot Poliwrath, I think. Poliwrath also falls into this category, while additionally being a potential Lapras counter. Boom, boom, and then we place them like here. Tentacruel is the first of the many water types that can help any Elite Four team. Water just has a ton of uses throughout all these fights, especially Bruno and the champ. As long as you have a halfway decent special attack stat, which Tentacruel does, you can bring value on pretty much any fight. Most importantly though, all of these Pokemon are expected to switch into Dragonite and kill with Ice Beam at some point. Slowbro is honestly a little bit underwhelming. Its garbage speed stat means it can't solo Blaine due to flinches, And it's not as good of a Dragonite counter as you'd expect for something that can hit with an Ice Beam. It straight up loses to the champ's Arcanine too. It's still a really strong choice for the Elite Four because of its matchup into Bruno, and it's got some really decent matchups on Lorelei and Agatha as well. Omastar is another one of these strong water types that's good on the Elite Four, just by nature of like being bulky and learning Ice Beam. It sets itself apart a bit with its poison type resistance, giving it some nice usage on Agatha, as well as being able to easily switch into Dragonite's Hyper Beams. Vaporeon is great for Sabrina, and deals solid damage once you get Surf. Its biggest Elite Four contribution, however, comes against Lance, where its bulk destroys Dragonite and makes it a solid counter to the Dragonairs as well. Blastoise is a surprisingly great counter to Lance, thanks to somehow outspeeding his Dragonite. It also has a solid matchup with Arcanine and Venusaur in the champ fight. I can't really say much else about this starter Pokemon though. I don't really think it does anything. It helps with Misty, I guess. Dugong is awesome, despite showing up really late into the game. Icy Wind is huge for speed control in the Elite Four. Being able to slow down like Agatha's Gengar is amazing. Stab Ice Beam is incredible and makes Dugong one of the best Dragonite counters, but it doesn't even have to give up its fire resistance against Arcanine because it gets Thick Fat. Lapras is also great, but honestly I expected there to be more of a separation between Dugong and Lapras. These two kind of do the same thing. The main difference is that Lapras gets Thunderbolt, which makes it great against Lorelei, and it also has a great matchup into Dragonite, but its matchup into Arcanine is like way worse. And that's all the water types. Next, a quick break with one of the best psychic types. Jinx does more than enough on the Elite Four to warrant an A-tier inclusion. It destroys Bruno thanks to the unique Ice Psychic dual typing, and also takes 3 kills against Agatha. Quick Ice Beams make it by far the best psychic type for Lance. Jinx is a traded Pokemon, which means it will always have the same nature in IVs. And its plus special attack nature is amazing and nets a ton of kills on the Elite Four, but very crucially means that if you're staying within the level cap and not EV training, you will not be able to outspeed Agatha's second Gengar. And with that comes the second group of Pokemon that almost always makes it onto an Elite Four team, the Electric types. An Electric type is essentially required for the Elite Four in my opinion. You just want something to blast through Lorelei's water types, but also need help against all the flying types, Golbat, Gyarados, Aerodactyl, Pidgeot, as well as Gyarados number 2 and Charizard if you picked up Bulbasaur. Fast electric types also really help against Agatha's Gengars. Raichu doesn't really do anything special and is actually kind of surprisingly bad against Misty if you get it early, but it does get Thunderbolt at level 26 for the early game. For the Elite Four though, it's just our baseline electric type. Electabuzz is in a similar boat there, in competition for Raichu as the worst electric type. It'll get the job done if you're lacking the other electric types though. Electrode is definitely a step up with its massive speed stat aiding its light screens, as well as the ability to blow up on the champion's Alakazam, one of the hardest Pokemon to counter this late into your gauntlet. Jolteon also benefits from a much better speed stat than Electabuzz and Raichu, but in addition has some really solid defenses. It has the stats to take down Lorelei on its own, which none of the other 3 electric types can say. It destroys Gengars, it confidently switches into Aerodactyl, but there is still electric types that are better than the evolution. Magneton's steel typing separates it from the other electric types. It has much better staying power against Lorelei, and is also able to contribute way more against Agatha, Lance, and the champion. Finally, the last Pokemon before we move into S tier is going to be the best starter in the game, Venusaur. Venusaur probably isn't the best Elite Four Pokemon, but it is an absolute monster throughout the game, starting by making the first 3 gyms Baby Mode easy, and providing value all the way through to the Elite Four. Leech Seed is its best asset in battle, just a ludicrously broken move. I genuinely felt like I was cheating when I was using this Pokemon. And this continues into the Elite Four, with Venusaur being able to fill gaps on pretty much any of these boss fights. Leech Seed and Sleep Powder mean that with this guy on your side, anything is possible. Also, not having to face Arcanine on the champ fight is a massive buff, because you're probably already bringing an electric type that can kill Charizard. Alright, this is it. 4 Pokemon remain. This is S tier, the best Pokemon in the game. Elite Four dominance is the biggest thing I'm looking for here. If you're able to bring any of these 4 to the Elite Four, you should pretty much win every single time. First, we have Zapdos. Unsurprisingly, taking the crown as the best electric type. Even though throwing out a flying type might sound crazy against Lorelei, Zapdos is strong enough to solo her team. It also 1v1s Machamp, and just kinda shits all over Agatha as well as Alakazam. If you're banning legendaries, bring Magneton. Otherwise, this guy will save pretty much any box from an Elite Four wipe. Exeggutor goes absolutely crazy on the Elite Four. It's got everything that Venusaur has, but also the broken psychic typing. Obviously, it's great against the water, rock, and fighting types that it destroys with Stab. It also beats Gyarados, despite its flying type and neutralizing grass damage. The biggest problem for Exeggutor is that it's extremely reliant on one-time use TMs, needing Giga Drain and Psychic to reach its full potential, but honestly, it's such a beast with these moves, plus Leech Seed, that it's worth the resource dump. It's not just a late game monster either, as it can solo Koga and Sabrina if you give it secret power. Okay, are you ready for the craziest discovery I made during all of my testing? I've never seen anyone talk about this encounter before, but it's genuinely mind-bendingly good. Here we go. The second best Pokemon that you could possibly get in a Fire Red Leaf Green Hardcore Nuzlocke is Mr. Mime. Really? The thing you have to trade away your Abra for? Hear me out. First of all, this thing is guaranteed because you can just buy Abra from the casino. It's incredible for the early and mid game, with Magical Leaf to give it really unique coverage. Once you get it, you basically one-tap every single random trainer from that point onwards. Hikers, lasses, bikers, rockets, black belts, swimmers, they all fall at the hands of the Mime. It has ridiculous support moves like Encore in both screens. It learns Psybeam at level 29, which just so happens to be Erika's level cap and allows him to easily solo her, and then learns Psychic just in time for Koga's level cap to solo him as well. You can bring this thing on every single gym fight and it'll do something. But here's the real kicker. Thanks to the fact that this is a trade encounter, it's always going to have a timid nature, letting it consistently outspeed Agatha's second Gengar. Because of this, as well as its access to Magical Leaf, Mr. Mime just straight up, always, no matter what, solo sweeps Bruno and Agatha. And as if that weren't enough, it gets Thunderbolt for Lorelei and the Gyarados. It can switch into Alakazam Psychics. You can go crazy with Encores and Screams on the champ fight. Seriously, this Pokemon feels like it's tailor-made to beat this game. But there's one more Pokemon that beats even the Mime. And that Pokemon is none other than Starmie. It's got speed, it's got power, it's got bulk, it's got Thunderbolt for Lorelei while resisting water and ice. It's got Psychic for Bruno and Agatha. It's got Ice Beams for Lance. And to top it all off, Patrick motherfucking Star over here gets access to Recover and Natural Cure for the Hardcore Nuzlocke game mode where no healing items are allowed. I'm pretty sure that there is Starmies out there that with the right nature and IVs, maybe some EVs, can solo basically the entire Elite Four except for the champion. So I guess if you learned anything from this video, if you're gonna Nuzlocke Gen 1, make sure to pick Leaf Green. And here's the full tier list for you to see. If you clicked on the video and then immediately skipped to this point, consider scrolling back and watching the rest. Give me some watch time, please. Don't just click off now. Thank you. As is tradition for these tier lists, make sure to let me know all of the placements you disagree with by writing a long and detailed YouTube comment. I'll make sure to not read a single one.